Hi, my name is Ted Huntington and welcome to my webpage. Here you will find links to my series of movies, Universe Life Science Future, a project that took me 7 years to complete and is the first movie to tell the entire story of evolution, the history of science, and the story of the future. And also you will find links to much of my original music, writings, my video log, and my books. In particular, I encourage you to take a look at my book, Big Science Lies. So definitely take a look at Universe Life Science Future. It's amazing to realize that in the near future we will be seeing walking robots all over the place, that when we look up in the sky we will see air highways of flying cars, that humans will be buying single-family ships located in cities that orbit the Earth, that people will be soon visiting cities on the moon of Earth, visiting cities on Mars, sending ships to other stars. In the far future, our descendants may pull other stars together to form a star cluster, and that eventually all the matter of the planets, moons, and even our star will probably be consumed in the rapid growth of our species. But getting back to the present time, there are some important ideas and simple truths that have been uncovered through much of this work. For example, how many people knew that there is a theory that all matter is made of material light particles? This is a natural idea because galaxies, stars, planets, and even we are finite material bodies, so perhaps light is similar. For example, when you see a candle burn, light from the candle leaves the candle and enters your eye, and over time the candle is made smaller in size. The logical conclusion is that light came from the candle and the surrounding air, that the candle was made of light. And then to learn that this theory, that all matter is made of light, was first made public in the 1200s by the first president of Oxford University, Robert Grosseteste, and that for centuries the light particle was viewed as the most basic element of all matter. For example, in the 1700s, the famous French chemist Antoine Lavoisier listed the light corpuscle as the smallest element known on his list of elements. Even antimatter is made of light particles because when antiprotons and protons collide, they don't disappear into empty space, they separate into light particles. The transverse wave theory of light, held popular over 200 years, is almost certainly wrong. Another great truth is that the concept of energy may be somewhat misleading when we realize that probably matter and motion cannot be converted into each other. That is, matter can never be turned into motion, and motion never changed into matter. Motion is conserved, matter is conserved, but matter and motion probably do not change into each other, as is implied by the product of mass and velocity in equations like that for momentum, P equals mv, or that for kinetic energy, E equals 1/2 mv squared, etc. Another great truth. It seems obvious that star clusters almost certainly are made by living objects who are farther along the path of natural selection and adaptation than we are. Because going to other stars, using gravity to pull our stars together and converting matter into more of us, our ships, food, and supplies, is an obvious future for us too. It's a great truth that even galaxies need to eat. Because everybody emits light particles and that matter needs to be replaced to continue to survive. It seems likely that the pattern of galactic evolution is from nebula to spiral to globular, and that's something we haven't heard of. Another great simple theory is that all light diffraction, interference, refraction, and polarization, all the known effects of light, might simply be the product of light particle reflection. So simple, but yet we have never heard this theorized publicly. Why? It may sound unusual, but part of the reason many of these simple truths may not have been heard and thought of by most people may have a very sinister explanation. There is a growing amount of evidence that there is a lot of technology that has not been formally announced to the public. Probably because of the military and economic advantages that such technology provides to the owners of these devices. And some of these key technologies include microscopic cameras about the size of a dust grain that can float freely inside houses. Wouldn't that give you a good idea of what your enemy was doing? And a second major secret technology, which I think is best described as being called remote neuron reading and writing. How many of you knew that an animal muscle was first made to contract using electricity back in the 1600s by Jan Swammerdam? Or about the Italian doctor Luigi Galvani, his work published in the 1790s, the first published report of a human making a frog leg muscle contract remotely with a spark from a distant spark generator by placing a metal scalpel on the frog nerve leg without even having to touch the frog, by just simply creating a spark, a distant spark. Now imagine that scalpel 300 years later is much smaller, and even smaller than a modern RFID chip, which is about the size of a grain of salt, and is much smarter. And then imagine that you are very much like one of those frogs. You probably have been neuron written on many times, and many of you probably never even realized it. The time your mouth said something you didn't mean to say. Maybe it wasn't so much a Freudian slip, but rather more of a Fraudian slip. The time you thought you saw something for an instant, but then looked again and it was gone. The voice or song you sometimes hear in your thought audio, might it have been written there? The time your finger moved before you fell asleep, could someone be writing on your neurons like Galvani did to the frog? You should be interested in this, and if you are, take a look at my webpage, d2bw.org. d2bw.org, and view the timeline to learn more details about all the growing evidence that remote neuron reading and writing technology was developed, and then many, many years ago, even possibly centuries ago in the past. There's a lot of good evidence. For example, take a look at the little video clip a few squares over from this video, the 1965 movie, from that movie, The President's Analyst, which includes a great description of remote neuron reading and writing technology, and that was made before me, and I'm sure many of you were even born. Other great and simple scientific truths are that the theory of space and time dilation and contraction, which is a requirement of Einstein's theory of relativity, are probably false. The theory that space contracts depending on the speed of some piece of matter was first published by George Fitzgerald in 1889 to defend the theory of light as a wave in an ether medium, which had been shown to be unlikely by the famous 1881 experiment of Albert Michelson that showed that light moves at the same speed in two different directions, which would be impossible if the Earth was moving through an ether medium. A few years later, Hendrik Lorentz later expanded this unlikely theory of space contraction to include even time itself slowing down depending on the speed of some piece of matter is traveling. And Einstein adopted this doubtful theory. How many people knew that Albert Michelson, for example, never accepted the theory of space and time contraction, even as late as the 1920s, but yet this bizarre claim still holds more than 100 years later? Beyond that, it seems likely that atoms can form even near the surface of stars and suns, stars and planets, and that atoms may be very much like molecules, only able to hold together in lower temperatures, subjected only to a small amount of particle collisions, not as the particle theory, or the popular theory of atoms has them forming only in supernovae and in the center of stars. And I learned this because in the 1950s, people were making all kinds of atoms go up and down, going up and down the periodic table by colliding carbon ions and other ions with a wide variety of atoms, showing that even light particles with high X-ray frequency can split atoms, that even medium atoms could be fissioned routinely, and that this building up larger atoms, atomic fusion, is a common phenomenon. And it's simple to realize the value of, for example, taking plentiful atoms like silicon and iron, and converting them in bulk into atoms of hydrogen and oxygen, atoms that could be used to produce air and water, especially on planets and moons. But we hear nothing about even the possibility of even a tiny effort of systematic atomic transmutation from iron into oxygen in bulk, for example. How about this idea that all human languages are made of the same 40 or 50 sounds, like ah, buh, kuh, duh, e, f, and so on, right? Pretty amazing and simple truth we don't hear about a lot. These are basic, simple ideas that anybody can understand, and just like these great scientific truths and theories, there are also great social truths and theories that many of us have never heard before because of this massive wall of secrets. For example, For example, not a lot of us have heard about this idea that we, the people, could be voting directly on all the laws that we are subjected to. The internet provides a very easy way, just like credit cards do, for us to record our votes on simple decisions. Like do we invade some nation, or should we get free phone service? Those type of decisions. There are some important criminal truths that we should also know about too. If I could get my neurons for a minute. Those of most importance, I think, are the fact that JFK was not murdered by Lee Oswald, but probably by Frank Fiorini Sturgis, and that RFK was not murdered by Sirhan Sirhan, but probably by Thane Eugene Caesar. And probably most importantly, that 9/11 was not done by 19 hijackers, but that all evidence makes it clear that the 3 WTC buildings were brought down by controlled demolition. And these simple truths that anybody taking 10 minutes to look at the evidence and think about are just scratching the surface of the massive rotten group that we are up against. So just quickly, I support decriminalizing recreational drugs, but know that, although it sounds unusual, you can be sure that remote neuron writing is making thousands of good, innocent people get addicted to rec and psychiatric drugs every day. I support decriminalizing consensual adult prostitution. There is a massive anti-pleasure fervor on the earth that is bizarre. It's shocking, in particular, when we, some century, see what's going on with the D2B. We shouldn't lock people in jail for taking money for pleasure. That's just because it's vicious, I think. And many of those people could be using that money to pay for their survival, it's as consensual as bagging groceries or driving a bus is, obviously. But somehow I think that's something that, for whatever reason, doesn't enter our thought audio, And the simple truth that I think many of us can agree on is that we are all against violence, and that violence is the big evil on earth. But we have yet to hear this from the wealthy, popular, and powerful. Stop Violence, Teach Science sums it up pretty clearly for me. I support ending the use of torture and making all health care consensual, in particular psychiatric care. Ending the use of restraints, electroshock, lobotomies, and unconsensual druggings of nonviolent people. It's shocking to know that in 1949, only a few years after the uncovery of the death camps like those in Auschwitz and Treblinka, that a Nobel Prize was awarded to Igaz Moniz for the lobotomy, many of which were probably done unconsensually. There are many great heroes and many terrible villains, and I think our descendants will probably get to see a lot more about all of them. So many of us have been tricked, whether by the lies of background radiation. Just quickly, background radiation can only be light particles that reach us from a galaxy that is close enough to reach us. It's absurd to think that there are not an infinite number of galaxies too far away for even one particle of light they emit to reach us. We've been tricked by the ancient claims of the religions that gods like Zeus and Poseidon and goddesses like Aphrodite and Athena control the universe, that Moses parted the Red Sea, that Jesus brought people back to life, that Muhammad somehow had a special connection to a deity. The big neuron lie, that the voice in our ear is the voice of a god trying to give us instructions that we must follow. Right? We've been tricked by thousands of supernatural claims, that there are witches and ghosts, tricked by the big science lies like time dilation and all the psychiatric fraud. Notice how the great Freud and Jung never mentioned that much of animal thought might be made of thought images, right, and thought audios. They must have mysteriously missed that simple truth. And the big criminal lies like the single bullet theory and the absurd 19 hijackers theory. Just thousands of big lies and mistaken beliefs. But the future looks bright for our species, I think, and for the truth being shown to all. When you look at the history of science, you realize where we are on the timeline, and we are near the beginning of an exponential growth of technology and exploration. Can you believe that the first powered controlled airplane flight only took place in 1903? That before the 1950s there was not even one satellite in orbit, let alone that people would be walking on the moon in only a few years. We are in the middle of a massive growth in technology and exploration. Just like the Americas was the new world for the Europeans, so the Moon, Mars, Mercury, and Venus, and all the other planets will be the new worlds of our time. So I'm optimistic and looking forward to the future. Thanks for visiting, enjoy the website, and feel free to send a message if you want to chat.